Africa Oil and Power is the continent's premier platform for energy investment and policy. And for the third year running, returned to Cape Town this month with a heralded series of energy events. Building on the success of previous years, AOP brought together ministers, senior government officials, and top executives from across the continent to lead the conversation on the state of Africa's oil, gas, and power sectors, and to identify the continent's greatest opportunities.
African oil and power is very, very important for us. It's where the African oil and gas industry comes together, discuss issues around Africa, whether it's investments in the upstream, that's the exploration of oil, the production of oil and the transportation of oil. So we get all the African oil companies and investor companies coming there, and it's always important to meet and have a conversations. And this is a great forum for us to meet, have a dialogue, and really push an African agenda into the oil market and into a changing environment with oil.
I think this is the very important event for the Africa, because now the oil and gas is the major of the fuel for the economy on different countries. And for now, the major consumer is development in Asia. But for the future, the most important part is in Africa. So now this is the meeting in Africa, and so many important political figures and the CEOs, international organization leaders come here. I think it's very helpful for the development of the energy in Africa.
For thermal production comes from gas, and gas is an offshoot of oil, mostly. And so learning more about what the producers of oil are doing, what the investors in the E&P game are doing, and where the next gas may come from, enables us to also position ourselves properly for new projects, and then to get a better sense of the challenges in those countries.
Events like this give all the players in the industry an opportunity to talk to each other, to hear each other's thinking, and especially in an occasion like this, we get to see the possibilities for regional cooperation, so we can see what other markets' thinking is and how that stacks up for South Africa.
Events like this are very important because, it connects all the different countries together. I think Africa has been working on connecting and inter-Africa. So events like this allows people from the West to meet the East and north of Africa and south of Africa. So it's something which is very important because you can share different ideas, and that's basically, where all the connections come from.
Finally, the time has come. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, honorable ministers, delegates, welcome to Africa Oil and Power 2018, and welcome to sunny Cape Town. About a year ago, when we were thinking about what would be the theme this year, we were very cognizant of the fact that the oil industry had emerged from a very long and painful downturn, possibly the most painful downturn that the oil industry has ever witnessed. African economies suffered particularly badly from this downturn: economic recessions, a loss in government revenue, losses of jobs. It became very apparent during this period just how vital the oil and gas industry is to many countries in Africa. So just as the industry is emerging from this very, very painful phase of its history, we want to be cognizant of what are the steps that are going to be taken to avert one of these crises in the future. So we came up with the idea this year of energy coalitions. What are the partnerships that can be utilized in order to avoid another painful downturn? How can countries work together? How can the world's energy institutions collaborate to avoid a downturn like this in the future? I want to take this opportunity to again thank each and every one of you for joining us here in Cape Town. Thank you to all of our partners and our sponsors for making this possible. And for our first keynote, I want to welcome to the podium the Honorable Energy Minister of South Africa, Jeff Radebe, for opening remarks.
This conference also takes place at a time when the world is grappling with the two challenges the volatility of crude oil prices, as well as that of the currencies of emerging markets. The theme of this conference, Energy Coalitions, is very relevant as it addresses the industry needs, the energy challenges, and the need to bring private-public partnerships in addressing the energy challenges of today. Energy poverty in Africa is of serious concern, which requires a concerted effort for us to address. The coalition of different energy stakeholders to resolve the challenge, which remains a stumbling block to Africa's development, is critical. Approximately 1.19 billion people, about 16% of the global population, lived without electricity in 2014. About 15 million people fewer than in 2013. About 2.7 billion people, 38% of the global population, are without clean cooking facilities. Numbers and trends differ greatly by region. The vast majority of people without access to electricity and clean cooking are in sub-Saharan Africa. In Africa, nearly 60% of people have no access to reliable electricity. To put these numbers in perspective, the entire continent of Africa has about 150 gigawatts of installed power generating capacity, uses about 3% of the world's electricity. Now, more than ever, time has come for South African policy authorities to remove any obstacles to economic growth. Policy certainty is essential, and in energy sector, through publishing the draft integrated resource plan, which we did last week, we intend removing any impediment to investment in new electricity generation capacities. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, energy is not only the lifeblood of our livelihoods, but also acts as the central nervous system that controls all economic activities of our countries. The endowment of a growing number of countries in the continent with oil and gas resources is no longer in doubt.
Today we'll be celebrating the Declaration of Collaboration. That Declaration of Collaboration that came between OPEC and non-OPEC nations actually stopped the downward turn in the oil industry. It stabilized the industry. It fought against volatility. Building upon that, let's take that to the next step and let's get it better and let's move it forward.
Many delegates agreed that the success of events just like this one points to the rise of Africa and its influence on the global power space. As of this year, Africa makes up 7 of the 15 members within the Organization of Petroleum-Producing Countries.
Africa has a seat on the table, a lot of influence, but it's how we shape that dialogue, how we shape that conversation to really make sure that African voices are heard, African issues are put forward at the world stage, and Africa is really shaping the world agenda. You cannot have a world agenda today without Africa, but it's all about how we shape it, how we strategize it. OPEC is going to be very important.
African countries have historically assumed strong proactive leadership roles in our organization, OPEC. I am delighted that following a decision at the 174th OPEC conference on 22nd June 2018, the African continent gained an additional voice in our organization. The Republic of the Congo became the 15th member of OPEC. I am very pleased that today I have the opportunity to speak once again with my colleague and friend, His Excellency Jean-Marc Tikaya, Minister of Hydrocarbons, Republic of the Congo. Congo's accession continues the positive trajectory which saw Gabon rejoin the organization in 2016, and of course our dear brother Gabriel Lima led his great country to join in 2017, thereby immeasurably enriching our organization. This consolidates the incredibly positive, constructive, and fruitful roles played by Libya since it joined in 1962, Algeria in 1969, Nigeria in 1971, and Angola since 2006. Indeed, the idea for our organization, unknown to many, was actually conceived here in Africa, specifically in Egypt. It was at the Cairo Yacht Club in 1959 that the Gentleman's Agreement, sometimes also referred to as the Mahdi Pact, was forged, which paved the way for the establishment of OPEC in Baghdad in September 1960. Aside from the African countries who are OPEC members, 2 African countries have also joined the historic Declaration of Cooperation, namely Sudan and South Sudan, ably represented by my brother and dear friend, Minister Ezekiel Gatkuk. I am extremely grateful for the dedication of these 2 countries, for their unwavering commitment to global oil market stability. Additionally, when the 3rd OPEC and non-OPEC meeting took place on November 30th last year, 6 additional countries issued declaration of solidarity to the decision by participating countries to amend the Declaration of Cooperation to take effect for the entirety of 2018. 4 of these countries hailed from Africa, namely Chad, Congo, Egypt, and Uganda. Furthermore, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, when the 4th OPEC and non-OPEC ministerial meeting took place on the 23rd of June this year, 4 additional countries were present, all of which were Africa: Chad, Egypt, Uganda, and South Africa. Furthermore, we were also joined at this meeting by my brother and dear friend, the Secretary General of APO, His Excellency Muhammad Gaya. These facts show that not only is the African presence in OPEC thriving, but also that we have an extremely productive and fruitful relationship with non-OPEC African countries and partners. It also reflects how widely OPEC's battle cry of working collaboratively to solve problems is being heeded.
Stay tuned for more from Africa Oil and Power 2018 after the break. Africa Oil and Power's theme for 2018 concentrated on the best ways to drive Africa's energy sectors forward through energy coalitions, how the private and public sectors can work together to transform the energy sector from the inside out.
In the spirit of what was said earlier on about the declaration of cooperation that has seen OPEC work hand in hand with non-member countries to find solutions, and to really look towards a world where we can have a little bit more predictability, perhaps, on pricing, on production, reduce the volatilities, and do what the Secretary General mentioned earlier, which is to unlock the potential in the oil and gas sector for the future. That $10 trillion that he mentioned would go a long way into creating the jobs that the minister from Equatorial Guinea mentioned. So we're going to use the words coalition interchangeably with cooperation and collaboration to see what governments can do to work together, what they can do to work with the private sector, and how they can engage these international organizations a little bit more so that everybody wins across the board. So let's start with you, Dr. Sun. In the context of the International Energy Forum, the more than 17 member states that you mentioned, what's being done to harness the cooperation that perhaps we're also seeing at the OPEC level?
Thank you very much. And first of all, I said that this is a very successful meeting, and we can see that so many important delegates joined this meeting. I feel that it's very important now for us to have an understanding of the situation. By now, the many factors impact the energy security supply. And as the minister mentioned that, without the energy supply security, and then the development and the living standards of people cannot be realized.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing, issue, that is the energy security supply. And now, so far by this, in Africa, especially in the southern part of the Sahara, and about 600 million people no access for the energy, and especially for the modern energy. So I think this is the one of the important issue. And the second one is now the issue people discuss a lot about the energy transition. So according to the outlook, OPEC and IEA and many other think tanks, for the 2040, the fossil fuels means oil, gas, and coal still take the majority of this energy structure. This about the three of the quarter still this. So how to use the energies cleanly and at the same time work together with the renewables and others.
What kind of ecosystem or environment needs to be created so that private equity companies can come into the mix? So that, we heard about the oil majors coming back, the independents withdrawing a little bit. What needs to be done to make sure that all of these players can have a stake in this investment opportunity?
Yeah, and I think the first important is we have a nice platform. And for these producers, consumers, for the government, the IOCs, and the international oil companies, and also for NOCs, and for the private sectors, all have this platform to sit together and discuss, to have a better understanding of the situation. Also, we have a duty data. This covers more than 90% of the whole world of the oil and gas production and consumption. For oil, 114 countries join the duty data. For gas, 85 countries join the duty data. So by this one, we work together with the countries to share, have a transparent understanding of the situation.
Right.
I think this is also important.
Right. Let's bring you in there, Mr. Gaia. I mean, you were quite frank and candid about some of the challenges in the genesis of the African Petroleum Producers Organization, and that you're here now, at least, with a structure that's a little bit more concrete. So going forward, what is cooperation going to look like, especially amongst countries and between governments and the private sectors?
Okay, thank you very much. But I would like to say that in the recent years, so there has been increasing awareness and enthusiasm among African countries about energy and oil issues. So this is because of the drop of oil, and most of African petroleum producers countries have their income from petroleum resources, which is about 70% in their budget. So this drop of oil make most of African countries thinking that the only one oil sector will not develop the country. So we have to use the petroleum to, as a key factor of the development of African countries. And besides that, so we need cooperation because we consider the African continent with 1 billion of population, so a very big market. And this big market is to be used by our organization to create a physical market, and we are on it.
African states sometimes seem to work against the interests of the private sector instead of collaboration. Let me explain. When the price of oil perhaps collapses, that's a global force. But that it would lead to currencies crashing. That's a local issue. That's a fiscal management issue. If governments fight with oil explorers on taxation, that's an internal issue. So we're talking here about opportunities, we're talking about partnerships, we're talking about unlocking investments. But there needs to be a much better way in which government and private sector come together to have these conversations. How can you facilitate that?
So, what I would like to tell you is that African actually is producing 12%, maybe more than 12% of the global oil producing. And the consumption of Africans is about 3 to 4% of, and we'd like to increase this and then to make the energy the key factor of the development of our countries. And I think by this way, it's not only the government concern. So we have to gather both private and public organization in Africa in order to increase the petroleum impact in our economies. So that's why, 2 years ago, we organized in Angola the first conference on local content in petroleum industry in Africa. The second conference will be organized this year in November. So, and then by the 2020s, we think that African countries will raise the local content in their industry up to 30%. So if we're talking about local content, it's private African companies which have to be involved in.
Fantastic. Mr. Centurion, let's bring you into the conversation. The good news, the gas industry seems to be doing well. It was a bumper year for them last year, 4% increases per annum. So there's a lot more stability on the gas side than there is on the oil side. But what kind of collaboration can exist between the two worlds? I was in Nigeria recently speaking to an independent oil company, and they've literally moved their focus away from core oil production into the refining of gas, because they want to be in both markets. They want to be in petroleum, and they want to be helping the country with its electricity needs. So there are opportunities. What lessons have you seen, and lessons that you can relate to us in terms of really unlocking potential?
First of all, thanks for your questions. I would like to for a particular question about this mixture, energy mix, and something like this. I'd like to say that from point of view of gas perspective and gas future, I'd like to say the prosperous future of gas, it's not an automatic thing. It's gained through the common efforts and joint attempts of concerned countries and concerned stakeholders of energy market, from my point of view. That's first. Second, I'd like to say that, first of all, there's the policy of policymakers and policy of states and countries, governments, by this way. Speaking about GCF, I'd like to highlight and stipulate specifically that GCF is a governmental organization. It means that we support government initiatives in this sphere. Today there was, from my point of view, a brilliant sample delivered by the head of energy ministry, I call it energy ministry, from Equatorial Guinea, one of our African key member countries, about the sky in Beijing. And the results of the policy pursued steadily by the Chinese government, that is shift from coal to gas in order to enhance and ensure in order to ensure the improved quality of air and avoid air pollution and something like this. So this is the selection of the state, the selection of the government of a specific country from our point of view.
Major players in the continent's oil and gas sector who made a notable impact in the African energy industry in the past year were honored at the Energy Coalition's Gala Dinner and Awards. Secretary General of OPEC, Mohamed Sanusi Bakindo, took away the Africa Oil Man of the Year award. That's all from Africa Oil and Power 2018. For more details on upcoming events and industry news, go to www.africaoilandpower.com.